But I'm not pulling this out of my ass or Wikipedia. Today, we're talking about Mary Shelley, and that is just a special interest of mine that I could talk about until I drop dead. So, how I am going to make this coherent? Go ahead and play the jingle.
Sorry if that was incoherent.
But I feel deeply called to make this video because I watched Frankenstein, Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein, the day after it came out. I didn't watch it on the Friday, I watched it on the Saturday. That's not relevant information. By the way, this was my very first copy of Frankenstein, and I ordered it off Thrift Books, and my initials were written on it. So do with that what you will. However, I loved it. I loved it so much. And I can say that as somebody who is a Mary Shelley stan. Frankenstein is my favorite book, which I've already spoken about. But I love Mary Shelley so much. And I love her so much that I have her signature tattooed on my arm. I love her down bad. And so it really bothered me to get on the internet after this movie came out and hear people who don't know anything talking about Mary Shelley as if they knew things and they don't. And it really, really bothered me that so many people were just saying things that were not true, that I felt called to make this video in which I am going to debunk some Mary Shelley myths that I've seen flying around the internet in the wake of Del Toro's Frankenstein. So this video is going to be slightly different than normal, but I just have to tell you guys how wrong you are about this woman because I love her so bad. I love her so bad. And I just can't allow the slander and the lies to persist. So welcome back to Abigail's Bookshelf. Today we're talking about Mary Shelley. Now I have to think of an intro. Hi guys, welcome to my channel. This is Abigail's Bookshelf, where I will just do book reviews, and it won't be anything more complicated than that. Now it's gonna become more incoherent. If you thought the intro was incoherent, sorry. I want to start this video by saying I am not a Mary Shelley PhD. I have her name tattooed on my arm. I have a pillow of her face on my bed. I own upwards of 30 copies of Frankenstein. I love Mary Shelley so bad. What gives me the authority to speak on this is that I have read a lot of biography and critical theory about Mary Shelley and about Frankenstein by people who have Mary Shelley PhDs. That's what these books are for. And so I'm speaking from the knowledge of these books and these authors, and I will tell you later in the video more about these books and which of these I recommend if you're interested in learning more about Mary Shelley. That's the foundation of where this information is coming from. So a lot of my sources will be directly from these biographies about her, but my primary source is her letters because, girl, she was telling us what she thought, and we can just read what she thought, and that can be the authority on what she thought. We're listening to Mary on this, guys, so let's get into it. Also, I want to show you all my books. These are the books that I'm consulting. Primarily this top one, which is a collection of her letters from about 1816 to about 1830 or 40. It's part one. And then a Mary Shelley encyclopedia. And of course, Romantic Outlaws, which again, I'm going to tell you about all these later. But just so you see where this is what I'm working from. Okay. I did not ask ChatGPT. Let's get started. So the first myth that I would like to debunk, because I feel it is the most heinous of the lies that I have seen spread on the internet recently about Mary Shelley, is that Percy Shelley, Mary Shelley's husband, was an abusive and bad person who exploited Mary Shelley. There was a movie, a biopic, within the last 10 years, I want to say maybe it was like 2018, 2019, somewhere in that era. I'm not going to tell you what it is because it was ass and I don't want you to watch it, not even to hate watch it. I don't want you to even look at it. I don't want you to know it exists, but I have to tell you because it has haunted my dreams. It was the most egregious thing I've ever seen. And so a lot of this first myth comes very much from the era of that film. Let's start by saying that it is impossible for us as modern 2025 people to conceptualize and understand the circumstances and conventions of the day. Mind you, Percy and Mary Shelley got together in about 1816 and they stayed together until his death in 1823. They were married, I want to say 1817. We can't understand like how those dynamics really would have felt or worked in that time period. And so let's just start there with like, we don't have the ability with our modern mindset, especially around feminism and marriage and like traditional heterosexual conventions, to really like understand what it would have been like to be married back then. Of course, we have, letters and diaries and documents from people who were living back then and were married back then, but still, like, even with that, it's kind of hard to understand how much of what they believed about their relationships was based in their experiences and how much was based in like how they were socialized. That said, Mary Shelley was extremely clear about how she felt about Percy Shelley. Unlike someone like Jane Austen, who we don't really have very much of her personal correspondence anymore because it was destroyed by her family following her death, my Library of Alexandria. Mary Shelley, we have a lot of her correspondence. We have a lot of her diaries. We have a lot of her journals. She was somebody who wanted to preserve what she thought, who worked through her feelings and emotions on paper, in writing. So we actually like can just like look and see what she thought. So let's ask her. In August 1822, this was following Percy Shelley's death. He died in 1821 in a sailing accident. Mary was like hugely impacted by Percy Shelley's death. And in 1822, she wrote to a friend, "People used to call me lucky. I was fortunate in having been fearlessly placed by destiny in the hands of one who was a superior being among men, a bright planetary spirit enshrined in an earthly temple, raised me to a height of happiness." Does that sound like someone who is being abused and exploited by her husband? Because I don't think so, girl. In 1814, Percy wrote to Mary Shelley, "I love you with an unalterable love." In August 1821, Mary Shelley wrote about her relationship with Percy Shelley. "Love caused our first imprudences, love which improved by esteem, a perfect trust in one another, a confidence and affection, which visited as we have been by severe calamities, have we not lost 2 children, has increased daily and knows no bounds." I'm sorry, that doesn't sound like someone who's being like, come on. Like just take 1 second to read one letter and you will, and not by any stretch of the imagination, begin to believe that this was a woman who was coerced into a relationship with this man. She loved him so much. To me, her love for Percy like dwarfs any other love story I've ever read. Like just reading her letters and how she talked about him, especially after his death, but also like while they were together, she wrote about him all of the time. She admired him so much. She respected him so much. She just thought like she called him a planetary being. Like she felt like he was some otherworldly person. She regularly called him her sweet elf. Like that's not and like listen, I am a misinterest, and I don't think I have, in any stretch of the imagination, made you believe otherwise about me. I don't like men. I don't trust men. However, I can tell you that Mary Shelley deeply loved and admired Percy Shelley, and she would be appalled to read some of the shit that you guys are saying on the internet about how he treated her. And on top of this, on top of like the fact that we have in her own words how she felt about her relationship with Percy Shelley and how much she loved him, we also know the context of how she was raised and who her parents were. And I think that this conversation gets very lost because Mary Shelley was so surrounded by celebrity in her life and is so associated with celebrity that we forget that she was the child of two of the biggest radicals in Western philosophy at the time. William Godwin and Mary Wollstonecraft were like English society didn't want to touch them with a 10-foot pole, girl. Like Mary Wollstonecraft, first of all, wrote one of the first manifestos of feminism ever conceived. They were operating around the French Revolution. They were operating around the American Revolution. They were writing about all of this stuff. They were getting into like thought that had not been talked about yet. And Mary Shelley was the child of these two people. Mary Wollstonecraft didn't really believe in marriage, had affairs with men and women all over the continent, did her own thing, had children outside of wedlock, did not give a flying you know what about what anybody else had to say about it. And you seriously, you think that her daughter, who loved her mother so much, Mary Wollstonecraft died very shortly after Mary was born, so they did not actually know each other in life. But you think the daughter of that kind of woman who was raised on her philosophy, William Godwin was very adamant that Mary Shelley know everything about her mother and everything about her mother's philosophy. You think that girl, who, by the way, met her sweet elf on her mother's grave while reading her mother's work, was tricked into a relationship with a man she didn't like? Be so fucking serious. It really bothers me. And it bothers me a lot because we have so few positive examples of not only collaborative, creative relationships between men and women from the past, but like just positive partnerships, period, from the past, that it really bothers me when people take this one that to many modern standards would be very taking away some of the societal stuff that was just like par for the course in marriage back then. Like they were a very egalitarian and very fair partnership. And so it really bothers me when people go online and just like project modern ideas about partnership or project modern misandry onto people who don't deserve it. And that's not to say that Percy Shelley was a perfect person. He wasn't. Mary Shelley also was not a perfect person, but she was by no stretch of the imagination the victim of this marriage. Like, she really was not. She was having a great fucking time. She was getting into all the shit he was getting into, and his death was like the end of her life. And it was because she lost that creative partnership. She lost that relationship that was the first one in her life where she was treated as an equal and like she was treated like she had thoughts in her head. It was extremely hard for her to grow up as the child of these two enormous philosophers who everybody knew. She was carrying the name Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin. It was such a burden to her as a child. And then to finally have someone who was willing to take her seriously and willing to help her create her own art and who loved her and believed in her as much as Percy did. And you guys want to say that it just there was no context for this to be reality. And on top of that, Percy himself was very anti-marriage and very anti-tradition. He was kicked out of Oxford for being an atheist, and he wrote and spoke a lot about breaking away from traditional convention. And that's even like how he became involved with Mary Shelley to begin with, because he really respected William Godwin's work, made his acquaintance, and then that's how he ends up meeting Mary. It really bothers me how people infantilize Mary Shelley. Like, you think she's smart enough to write Frankenstein, but not smart enough to not be in a relationship with a bad guy? We gotta pick one, girl. She was raised by geniuses. She was not naive. I think, of course, like anyone, she may have been very infatuated by Percy, he was very famous at the time. He was very wealthy at the time. And so she definitely could have been infatuated by some of those other power dynamics. But at the end of the day, they stayed together. They respected each other. They loved each other. And you can read that in her letters. She literally writes about it and he writes about it. And so it really bothers me when people just go online and spout nonsense that don't know what they're talking about. It hurts me. It hurts me in a way that I think Mary Shelley actually just like took possession of my body and made me speak on that. And she can do that. I consent to that. All of that to say, we do have very strong and compelling evidence that Percy Shelley liked to participate in extramarital affairs. In his view, He was very against traditional marriage. He was more promoting a sort of open relationship. However, he did not believe that you could and should just like sleep with anybody you wanted to sleep with. He believed that if you formed a deep emotional connection with somebody, that your marriage should not prevent you from participating in sexual encounters with those people just because you are married. He didn't like the idea that this kind of law made love illegal. Because to him, he didn't see adultery in the sort of puritanical Christian way that the rest of the people around him did, and people still do. But he very much believed that essentially the law should not tell you who you're allowed to love. And say more, King. That said, he did participate in extramarital affairs. In fact, his relationship with Mary Shelley, he was married to a woman named Harriet when he started seeing Mary Shelley. I think if you're going to make a critique about it, I think obviously there is a sort of patriarchal power dynamic going on because Percy can like obviously be like, yeah, we should be able to sleep with whoever we want to sleep with. And like his wives can't really consent to that in the same way because they were women in 1817. And the way that he treated his first wife was really below board. However, that's what he believed. And there is evidence that Mary Shelley also very much believed that. We have letters of her writing to other men, taking and expressing feelings of love and affection. We do not know how many men she slept with. That doesn't really matter. We don't know how many people Percy slept with. Also, doesn't matter. That's not our business. This dynamic existed among them. For all intents and purposes, we have to believe that it was consensual among them because we have no evidence to the contrary. Just because it doesn't align with your belief system does not mean that he was taking advantage of her or he was exploiting her in any way. I think it's really important that we all go outside and we leave the garden and we go take a big old juicy bite out of the nuance tree. Just because things don't align with your values or your belief system does not make them inherently wrong. And casting your beliefs and morals and values on other people and believing that they should also uphold them, I don't believe in that. And I feel like it's unfair to not only kind of try to cast our modern beliefs and the very strict labels about beliefs onto the past, but also I don't think it's fair to judge that somebody was victimized just because they were treated in a way that you wouldn't have liked to be treated. She literally said it was okay. And one final point about that before we move on to the next myth. We do have a letter from Mary from when Percy was alive. There were some friends of the Shelleys who were circulating very hurtful rumors about Percy Shelley sleeping with Mary's stepsister Claire. Claire had been a very active participant in the Mary and Percy dynamic from early on. She was a friend of theirs. She traveled with them when they eventually ended up leaving England. She eventually started up an affair with Byron, who we will get to. We do know that Mary was not super fond of her sister. Not super fond is a little bit sugarcoating the issue. Mary did not like Claire. There is a letter of their travels where she's like, this would all be better if Claire was not here. Their personalities didn't align. They were not raised together. They were put together when they were teenagers. So these friends start circulating rumors that Percy and Claire had been hooking up and having this like really grody affair, and that Claire had a child by Percy. And Mary finds out about this and she's just like so beyond hurt. She writes this letter that's just so angry, and she writes multiple times like, I'm so angry I almost can't write, like because she was so hurt by this. And she adamantly denied that they ever had that Claire and Percy ever had a relationship. Of course, that's what she would say, right? But at the same time, I believe like that she believed that, and if they did or did not is not any of my business, because these were people and they're allowed to have personal lives even if they are dead and gone and are considered kind of like celebrity figures now. But it was very hurtful to Mary for that kind of rumor to be spread, and I don't think that negates the fact that she did also participate in these sort of like love exchanges with other men. I don't think that her dislike of this rumor about Percy and Claire negates the fact that she was still consensually involved in everything else that was going on. She just hated Claire. Like, she hated Claire. Like, can you imagine if your bitch sister was being rumored as being with your perfect husband, that would hurt you so bad. Like, of course she's gonna be like, that never happened. But that doesn't mean that she like was not more okay with him having other relationships with women or men or whoever at other times. She just didn't like Claire. She did not fuck with Claire. And so she wanted to kill that rumor dead. Nuance. Let's practice it. Next myth. And this is a cause that is near and dear to my heart. It's kind of like this. So this myth is going to very much follow the kind of the same overarching problem of the first myth, which is like, you guys are not listening to what Mary Shelley is saying. This second myth is largely kind of came up in dialogue about the Frankenstein movie, because at the end of Frankenstein, if you've not seen it, the movie closes with a quote from Byron. And the girls were angry about that. And I'm going to hold your hand when I say this. Mary Shelley respected Byron very, very much as her friend. I think maybe, hey, maybe something to think about. Maybe you center men too much to the fact where if you see any men at all, you stop seeing women. Something for you to think about. I think the quote was perfect. I thought it perfectly encaptured what Del Toro was saying about this particular version of Frankenstein that he made. I think it was a beautiful quote, and I think it spoke very much to who Mary Shelley was as a person. You can talk all day long about how horrible Byron was. He was not a good guy. I'm not here to make you believe that Byron was a good guy. I don't believe that. I do believe that despite the things that he did and the things that he said and like the trouble that he got into and the way that he treated women, Mary Shelley respected Byron very, very much. She says that. She considered him one of her dearest friends. She loved him very much. She admitted that he had faults. She admitted that there were things that he did wrong. They often fell out with one another over the course of their friendship, but until the day he died and until the day she died, many years later, she maintained that he was very intelligent and he was very charming and he was very wonderful and that she loved him very much. Sometimes people we love and admire people that we don't love and admire. And again, I'm asking you to stop projecting your values and beliefs onto people who don't know you and who have different experiences than you do and different values than you do and different beliefs than you do. That's okay. That's okay. I think that's beautiful. I do. I think it's wonderful how much she respected him and how much he respected her. They had a very complex history, and I'm not going to go into all of that, but I want to focus on, again, in her words, a couple of things that she said about him. Percy Shelley was the son of a lord. I don't know if he was actually a lord. He was called Sir Timothy Shelley, and he was very wealthy, and he had an estate. And because of the way that Percy Shelley behaved, very out of line with upper class British society. He and his father did not get along at all. This rift had always kind of been there. Sir Shelley was not a fan of Percy being kicked out of Oxford for atheism, nor of all of his sort of incendiary political tracts that he published. But in particular, Sir Timothy took really big issue with Percy leaving his first wife, Harriet, and their two children, Ianthe, Gideon reference, and the other one whose name I don't remember. Sir Timothy took really big issue with Percy abandoning Harriet and his children and running off with Mary Shelley. That's his right. And so from that time, those two had a basically no relationship at all. However, when Percy ends up dying, he dies in 1822. Following his death, Mary applied to Sir Timothy asking him to basically give her the money that Percy had been getting from him, since they were married at the time, not under English law, but under the church, which, basically was more important to them at that time anyway. So Mary applied very heavily to Shelley, asking him to give her, to help support her, because he was the money earner, and and by the way, he earned that money just by inheriting it, but whatever. So Mary was like, well, I have Percy's son and I was married to him, and so will you send me the money you're sending to him? And Sir Timothy was like, no, I will not, bitch. And so he didn't. But Byron was a huge supporter of Mary Shelley during this time and helped her very much to get the money that she was owed from Percy's father. He was a huge advocate for her. Lord Byron went to London many times to speak to Sir Timothy and to campaign on Mary's behalf. And unfortunately, Byron died before anything further came of it. But Mary relied on him very much and was very, very thankful for all of his support in helping her. He also employed her to make clean drafts. This was before typewriters. And so when writers wrote their piece, they would have to turn it into the publisher and it would have to be legible. And he's Lord Byron. He doesn't have time to make his handwriting clean. And so Mary Shelley would often copy out his poems and send them away. And so that was one way that she was able to support herself through his help. And he bought some furniture from her. He found ways to help support her because they were friends and they loved each other. And I'm sorry if that hurts your feelings, but that's just true. So Byron dies in 1824. He's run off to Greece to fight for Greek liberation because he just really loved Homer. And he ends up getting sick and dying. And when Mary found out about this, she was very devastated. It was 2 years, I believe, after Percy had died. And she just it was just another blow for her. Therese, who was Byron's kind of consort at the time, in May of 1824, she asks Therese to send her any uncompleted poems or any letters or basically anything that Mary could keep as a memento of Byron. And she writes, "Be assured that anything you sent to me, any copies of his letters, will be sacred to me. In asking for these monuments of his final moments, I am moved by the true affection I felt for him." And like I said, she wrote to Byron. We have a lot of copies of letters that she wrote to Byron. She was very affectionate to him. She loved him very much. She admired him very much. And so I think that she would have been very flattered by seeing Byron's quote there at the end. I think she would have felt like it encapsulated what Del Toro was doing with Frankenstein in that movie. She would not at all have been offended. She would not have at all have been bothered by that and felt overshadowed by that in any way. I think that some of you need to just do a little bit more in here, to the point where you're not centering men so much that seeing one male name has erased in your brain the fact that the whole entire movie was based on a book written by a woman. Next myth is this idea that Mary Shelley would have been hugely offended by a man adapting her work. No. No, she would not have. Again, look at her life. She spent a lot of her life around men. She was not a misandrist. She did not believe men were inherently flawed. She loved men very much. The men in her life that were important to her, she valued very highly. She did not at all ascribe blanket gender disdain on men at all. And you're crazy if you think that she did. In fact, I would argue that in some places of her letters, she actually is a little bit of a misogynist. Who wasn't? It was 1817. And that shows you that even being the daughter of Mary Wollstonecraft is not going to protect you. It's not going to protect you from internalized misogyny. She couldn't dodge it, and neither can you. You might say you're a girl's girl, but at the end of the day, you have said some heinous shit about women. Her father was a huge, huge, huge influence in her life. She respected him immensely. She thought he was very intelligent. She thought he was very smart. She respected him very much. They had their issues, despite the fact that she was the daughter of a revolutionary, a proto-feminist, and despite the fact that she was raised far more egalitarian than most women of her time period. Godwin spared no expense on her education. She still was in 1817. She still was a woman under patriarchy and was a misogynist sometimes. She found a lot of her mentors in men. That's not to say that she didn't also do that with women, but it's just men were allowed to be taught to read and women weren't. So, you really don't have a choice of where you're going when you want someone to teach you. That's. So she was not a misandrist by any fucking stretch of the imagination. I think that she would not only be very impressed by what Del Toro did with her story and the way that he adapted it into a modern, and especially for him, a Mexican-inspired look onto toxic masculinity and the sort of generational curse of being a man. I think she would have respected that a lot, and she of course would have respected his large body of work, and she would have been very flattered that he thought enough of her work to adapt it, because she remained until the end of her life very humble about what she had done with Frankenstein. And again, she was operating without, like, we're operating with a context of time that she did not have. So to her, she was just, again, surrounded by incredible celebrity. Her parents were extremely famous. Her husband was extremely famous. Her Lord Byron was extremely. She was surrounded by people who were legendary in their own time. And she doesn't have the hindsight that you and I do of, like, her legacy and what she did, and the hugeness of what she was able to accomplish in her life. She doesn't have that context, and so she remained for her whole entire life very, despite the fact that Frankenstein did very well in her time, she just remained without that context of knowing that she would be the most famous person out of all of those famous people. And I think that she would have been very astounded by that and probably very uncomfortable with that, because she spent much of her life trying to keep up the names of the famous people around her: Lord Byron, Percy Shelley, Mary Wollstonecraft, William Godwin. She was very dedicated to making sure that the legacies of those people that she loved and admired were maintained. And that was she felt, especially after Percy's death, that was her job, was to make sure that people knew who Percy Shelley was. And the kind of irony of that situation is that I bet most of you don't know who Percy Shelley actually is. I bet you don't know a single poem by Percy Shelley. I bet you couldn't name a single Lord Byron poem if your life depended on it. And that's okay. And some of you don't know who Mary Wollstonecraft is, and some of you don't know anything about William Godwin. But at the time, those people were huge celebrities. Like, you understand, like, why she would be so humble, and why she would have, I think, felt very proud to be the subject of Del Toro's beautiful work. One of my favorite bits of correspondence that we have from Mary Shelley, I saw it in 2015. I went to Oxford and I got to see their Percy Shelley collection they had out at the time. And obviously, you can't talk about Percy without talking about Mary. And so it was a very much a sort of coordinated. It was kind of both of them, but British people, especially people in Oxford, are much more into Percy Shelley, which I think is funny because, like, you guys kicked him out. While I was there, I saw the journals that they have where Percy and Mary kept these journals together as they traveled through Italy and through Europe. And it's so moving to me. They kept these kind of joint journals and would write in them together. There's one entry that I think just, like, beautifully captures Mary and Percy's relationship and kind of how important collaboration was for them. So there's this entry of them, I believe they're in Italy, and it's describing kind of their day. Percy is writing this. Mary was there, and then in the next sentence it says Shelley was also with me. And it gives me chills. It gives me chills because it's just, like, such a beautiful example of how they felt about each other and how they communicated with each other, and, like, it's both them separate and them together. Mary was there and Shelley was also with me. And that, like, with me, who's the, like, it's just, it gets me. It really gets me. And I think Mary Shelley would have been hugely flattered by Del Toro's movie. I think she would have been very moved by the kind of themes that he brings up and the arguments that he makes about masculinity and parenthood, especially. I think she would have loved it. And again, we can actually just, like, read her letters and her biography and know that she did not find offense in people reading her work and adapting her work and having feelings about it. Okay. Next one that I want to talk about is this myth that Percy Shelley controlled Mary Shelley and rewrote Frankenstein. This is a myth that is basically just based on misunderstanding how writing works. So basically, Mary Shelley writes Frankenstein, and she does this very much in collaboration with Percy and with Byron to some extent, because she was listening all of the time to what these men were talking about. They were talking about insane shit. She was listening. She was contributing. She was having conversations with them. And so a lot of what's in Frankenstein was inspired by these conversations. And we can, again, go back in her letters and see the places where she's talking about what they were talking about and see it show up in Frankenstein. So, like, there is evidence that this was totally the case. Nothing is written in isolation. for anyone ever. Everyone is writing based on their experiences, based on the life that they live, based on things they're hearing, based on things they're reading. Nothing is created in a vacuum, especially not Frankenstein. So Mary Shelley writes Frankenstein, and Percy, who was older than her and who was a man and so who had a formal education, edited it for her. And in fact, this is a thing that all writers actually do. They get someone else to edit their work and to make it better. And for almost every book you've read, it is also as collaborative as Frankenstein was, because they have an editor who goes over it and says, hey, what if you did this? What if you fixed this? What if you used this word? What if, you punched up more here and took out more here? That's just like how writing works. And so Percy was her editor, and you can actually just like get a copy of the book and see where, like, they just make those where you can see what the edits were, and you can go and you can look at the original manuscript and see where he changed things. He didn't make anything worse. He did not control it. It was her story. He worked to make it better. And that's just like how books work. Percy never took credit for Frankenstein. He was assumed to have written it because he published it and because it was dedicated to William Godwin. And once people find out that Percy Shelley was the one who had submitted this manuscript for publishing, and the fact that it was dedicated to William Godwin, of course, people are going to assume that he wrote it because he's a man and women don't write. And it was a complete shock to everyone to find out that Mary Shelley had written it. And he never once took credit for it. He did not ever feed into any rumors that he was the one that wrote that. In his letters to other people, like, this was not like a secret. He spoke about Mary's book and Mary's writing, and it was 100% her creative work in his mind. He helped her make it, but he never once took credit for it. And he took its success extremely seriously. He was at that time a published author. I won't say he was extremely successful because he was writing shit people didn't want to read, but he was publishing. And he wrote in a letter to their friend Hunt in August of 1817, "Poor Mary's book has come back with a refusal, which has put me in rather ill spirits. Not my book, not Frankenstein, Mary's book." Like, he was never taking credit for this. When Sir Walter Scott, who was another huge famous poet at the time, wrote a review about Frankenstein and contributed it to Percy, Mary actually wrote to him and was like, "Hey, thank you so much for that kind review. However, I want you to know that I wrote this and not Percy, and I want you to know that because I would be embarrassed if you," I think she called it like this juvenile work. If you attributed this juvenile work to Percy, that's embarrassing. And so I'm going to tell you that I did it so that you don't do that. And so again, that humbleness kind of came up. There was a confusion for a little while, but once Mary was actually named the author, Percy never took credit for her work ever. And he would not have. And I know this because he wrote in a letter in 1821. She was working on The Last Man at this time. "And how are you? And how do you get on with your book? Be severe in your corrections and expect severity from me, your sincere admirer. I flatter myself that you have composed something unequaled in its kind, and that not content with the honors of your birth and your hereditary aristocracy, you will add still higher renown to your name." Guys, that makes me so emotional. She was so profoundly bothered by the fact that she was the child of these two hugely influential people. And she always felt very much this feeling of anxiety that she would never be able to live up to what they were. And a lot of that comes into Frankenstein, but it was something that haunted her, like, throughout her relationship with Percy. And for him to say, "You will not only do those names credit, but you will add to it and you will make your name based on your own merits and your own skills." If you read her letters following Percy Shelley's death, she was just devastated by his loss. Like, it was the end of the world for her. And she saw Percy as her soulmate, as this person who made her better and who lifted her up and who cared for her and who just her entire life was this man and this beautiful creative relationship they had together. I'm getting choked up. She just loved him so much, and she struggled so profoundly with his death. And I think you can see that in Frankenstein because, again, in 1831, she releases another kind of version of Frankenstein in which she's changed some things. And I think one of the things that stands out to me the most is Victor's emotional turmoil and how just all of the scenes where he's lamenting the losses of all of these people in his life that he loved and that he felt responsible for their deaths. It is exactly what she was writing in her letters in 1822 when Percy died, and it's so painful. And it's very hard for me to read the book and not just get like so. I'm getting choked about it right now. She spent the rest of her life like dedicated to his memory, and she was writing, and she did write The Last Man, which again is exactly how she felt about being left behind. And I think one of the most moving things about Frankenstein is this feeling of like being the sole survivor. Like she faced such profound loss. She, grew up without her mother, and then she lost her father very much kind of disowned her and kicked her out when she was a teenager because she couldn't get along with his wife. And she just felt very like, she grew up feeling very unwanted, and on top of that felt like she had this huge burden of legacy to live up to. And it just was it's so much for like a child to have to deal with, and for her to be as intelligent as she was and educated like she was, to be so aware of this burden and so aware of her unwantedness and the sort of loneliness that she carried, and then to find this person who loved her and treated her as an equal and wanted to help her make something that would make that burden of loneliness and that burden of legacy mean something. And then to lose him and to lose all of they had several children together, and they lost, I think, like four children, and only one of them ever survived into adulthood. And she loses Byron, and she is cast off from her society and is very isolated and alone following Percy's death. And again, she's fighting, Timothy Shelley, who wanted to take her child away from her. And she's like just living this profound solitude after these 8 years of her life that were just so, she felt like she was going to have it all, and then for everything to be taken away from her and her to have to go on another 30 years without him. Oh, it moves me so much, and I'm getting choked up. And to think that like she spent the rest of her life trying to keep Percy's legacy alive and to show the world how important and how brilliant he was, to feel like that was her entire, like, she literally writes several times like she feels like that is her duty, and that without her son she would not have stayed alive when Percy died. And like just existence was such a burden to her, and one of the ways that she was able to get through was by preserving Percy's legacy and keeping him alive in that way. It's important to me. This kind of like hateful rhetoric about her life and the sort of victimization, you're victimizing her for like the wrong things. So I want to leave off with my favorite line from Frankenstein. It's actually from the 1831 preface, the author's introduction, where she's kind of talking about it's more famous for being the origin of the ghost story competition story. That's where she kind of talks about where she came up with the idea for the book. My favorite line is towards the end of the preface, and I'm gonna fight for my life not to cry reading this because it just it moves me, it moves me. She's told the ghost story about how Byron urged them all to come up with a ghost story, and this is what she came up with. And then she had this dream that inspired the story, and she spent a few days feverishly writing it. And she was like, well, this is probably nothing, but Percy was like, no, I think you have something here, I think you should keep working on it, like, see what happens. And then she writes this part. And now once again I bid my hideous progeny to go forth and prosper. I have an affection for it was the offspring of happy days, when death and grief were but words which found no true echo in my heart. Its several pages speak of many a walk, many a drive, and many a conversation when I was not alone. And my companion was one who, in this world, I shall never see more. But this is for myself. My readers have nothing to do with these associations. Oh my god, that gets me every time. It gets me every time. I just find it so. Did you see that? That was like a whole tear. I don't have words. I don't have words. Let the tear going down my face speak for itself. In closing, I'll tell you this kind of funny story. Back in, I want to say 2019, my grandmother took me and my sister down to Macon, Georgia, to tour like an old historic house. I can't remember what it's called. She just likes to do that kind of stuff, so we went. It was overall a very stressful experience. However, in the main hall, it's like this really grand, like, late Victorian or early Edwardian house. Beautiful, beautiful house. In this like grand foyer, there's like this beautiful oak staircase like going up, and there's this huge stained glass window, and we were kind of like just standing in the hall. We were the only people on our tour, and this like elderly woman was telling us about where the marble came from or whatever they were talking about. And I look up in the window, and shock upon shocks, who do I see but a glass a glass portrait of Lord Byron. And I said, "Is that Lord Byron?" Because what the fuck was he doing there? That's where you put Jesus usually on that kind of stuff, but it was Lord Byron, and what a choice. And the lady stops and she stares at me like I'm a psychopath. And I was like, "Oh, maybe I misinterpreted who this is. This was Jesus, my bad." She said, "I've been doing tours here for 20 years and no one has ever known who that was." And I said, "Well, there's a first time for everything." So, that's what I'm doing for Lord Byron, by the way. Just identifying his face in public in rural South. Just and the reasoning why he was there was just that the lady who built a house liked Lord Byron poems. Hey, not my choice, but to each their own. To each their own, girl. It was a gorgeous, gorgeous window. In closing, I want to say that again, nuance exists, context matters, consult primary sources, watch Del Toro's Frankenstein. Bye. I also forgot to tell you to like and subscribe. So if you're still here, do that.
Sorry if that was incoherent.